Welcome to another Azure Guide video, where hands-on learning is priority one. I'm an Azure administrator, an Azure security engineer, as well as an Azure solutions architect. Hey, welcome back to another Azure Guide video. And this could be a very exciting day for you if you've never created. What we're going to do today is create a VM, a virtual machine, running Windows 10 in Azure. And if you never created a VM before in Azure, it's a pretty exciting day. You're going to see, really, I believe, we're going to use the portal, and we're going to learn through this series. There's lots of different methods or ways to create a VM. We're going to use the portal. Excuse me. We'll learn throughout the series. You use PowerShell and ARM templates. But today is the portal, which is the interface for Azure. And we're going to create our very first VM. So pretty exciting day. So like I said, we're going to create a VM. So let me just say here, we're going to create a VM. And our VM is going to be a Windows 10 machine. And I'm gonna give it a name of admin W10. So that's the basics of the machine, right? We're also gonna use we'll probably need a username and a password. So I'm gonna use speed for my username. And you can think of a password for yourself. But we're going to need, before we create the VM in Azure, we're going to have to create some other objects or resources in Azure. And the first one of those is called a resource group. I want to make that a big circle. And in general, we'll talk more about resource groups later in another video. Remember, this video is focusing on VM, creating your very first VM. It's supposed to be a very basic video, but I'll introduce you a little topic about what a resource group is and there's other supporting resources. But generally, the resources you add in here be like a storage account, so there's your resource, a VM, a web server, like a web app, and you put resources in your resource group, and generally those resources share the same life cycle. So when you update the resource group, you update all those resources in there. The same life cycle in general. Now, in this lab series in here, for example, let's say we had a storage account. We're not going to make one today, but let's say we made one. Our resource group would use that same storage account. In the real world, if you had 10 resource groups, you probably would not want 10 storage accounts. You'd probably may make one or two and have those resources in that group refer to that storage account in a separate resource group. But for now, and generally, remember resource groups, you put resources in them. It's like a container for other resources. And they generally share the same life cycle. That's what you want to know for now. And so what other resources do we need to make in our container called the resource group? So let me just come out here and put RG for resource group. All right. So what other resources do we need to make to support a VM? Well, in the real world, we need a thing called some kind of network addressing. In the Azure world, that's called a Vnet, or virtual network. For us, we're going to use, at least I'm going to use whatever you want, but if you want to follow along exactly, 192.168.0.0/16. Now, hopefully, you have a background in some basic IP addressing. That's going to be our virtual network. And of course, the virtual network is a fundamental building block for your private network. VNets generally enable different Azure resources, such as virtual machines, and to securely communicate with each other and the internet. And of course, you could also have your VNet communicate to your on-premise network. But in a VNet, we also need a thing called a subnet. And if Vnet's are the heart of your network architecture, the subnet it hosts are a subnet. So this is where you connect your resources. And you generally divide up your Vnet into subnets, multiple subnets. Our first subnet we're going to have is 192.168.1.0/24. And in simple terms, if you're not familiar with networks at all, 16 is this right here. And notice we got a 1. So the subnet is like our 1. So 24, if 16 is 2 of these are called octets. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 octets. 24 probably means 3. So 1, 2, 3. There's a total of 32. So 8, 16, 24, 32. So anything on this dot 1 can communicate with each other. So if I had another machine called another VM 192.168.1.1, it would work. 192.168.2, those two VMs cannot communicate to each other because they're not on the same subnet. But again, that's all. That's getting a little ahead more than we need to know for now. But just for now, make your VNet and subnet these values here. What else do we need for a VM? Well, let's put our VM in there now. So we're going to slide him in here. And here he is here. We know it's going to be we know what the username is. We have the password down. We have the OS. IP address. Well, Azure is going to give us that automatically. Because we're going to tell it, when we build it, to put this VM in this VNet and in this subnet. And that's a private IP address. We can also give our VM a public IP address. That's an address that's available on the internet. In general, you don't give a machine a public IP address because that's means people from the internet can get to it. But we're going to give it our IP address because that's the only way we can get to these VMs. So we'll talk more about that later. You can also, as we learned from the last video, you could put a VM in a availability set, an availability zone, a proximity placement group. Today, we don't care about any of that. This is what we care about. Putting our first VM in our VNet. Now let me just sit back here. Did I leave anything out? I can't think of anything, but I'm sure I probably did. But this thing is 90% there, I do believe. And, all right. And then, of course, during the video, I will have what I call info tips. So as we go through the video, and for example, when we point to the VNet, I'll have a little text box that comes out and tells you a little more details about the VNet. So that's something you can read on if you want more information at this point, or just ignore if this is overwhelming already. All right, so I think it's time to get in the portal and start working. Okay, very exciting. We're going to create our VM. But as I mentioned just earlier, before we create the VM, we need a resource group. So I'm going to come over here to resource group and say create. And choose your subscription. I'm going to call this, how about AZ Guy RG1. I'm going to put it in East US 2. I'm I'm not going to worry about tags for this point. I'm going to click on review and create. And then I'm going to go to my resource group. Pretty good so far. All right, so now notice we have an add button. How convenient. So I'm going to say add. I want a Windows 10 machine. I'll type Windows 10, and there is my drop down. Windows 10 Pro version 2004. That sounds good, but let's just see what our options are. 2004, 1909. I really don't know enough to know what's different between 204 or 1909, but I'm good with this. So we're going to say create. Now, how easy was that? We don't have to worry about getting a DVD, finding it on the network. Just boom. So your own software library on demand. All right, so it's got our subscription, our resource group, and our name. I think we said I'm going to call it, what did I say I was going to call it? Admin W10. All right. Admin W10. And we're going to put it in the same region as our resource group. And again, remember we talked about we said in this we're not going to worry about any availability options. But if we did, here's our availability zone that we talked about in the first video, availability sets. Don't worry, we'll obviously be working with these later, but let's keep it simple. Try to learn one thing per video. Here's the image. We're going to Windows 10 Pro. The size, that's one thing I didn't mention about the size. Let's see what this tells us here. Select the VM size, support the workload that you want to run. Yeah, so basically the size can determine your processing power, like what CPU, what memory, and how many disk drives. And of course, that determines the price. So this is a B2S, which can give us 2 CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM. I really think we want 8 gigs of RAM. So if I click the drop down, will that be an option? The D is a little more expensive. I like to keep it in the B class, but let's see. We got one with 2 and 8 gigs of RAM for $70 a month. It's in the D class. If I select all sizes, I'm hoping we get a B series. B2MS gives us our 2 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM for $60. So I'm going with the B. Username, I'm going to go with speed. Password. Public inbound ports, I'm going to go with 3389. In the real world, you really wouldn't use RDP to connect to the machines. You'd probably have some type of on-prem VPN. I'm going to click this because I can. I'm going to hit next. That's just saying that you have a license already, so you get charged less. So I'm going to be charged for compute time and not for the Windows license. OS disk type. These are basically the speed and what you're going to get charged. I'm going to go with standard SSD, or how about standard HDD? That's the cheapest. I don't care about speed, right? I care about speed because that's why I choose 8 gigs. But the speed of the disk drive, I don't really care. I'm not going to do a lot of crunching at all. So here's where we can add more data disks. We're not going to. This is where we get into our network. Notice that you could. I went into the next one. But I'm going to go back one. Notice you could review and create right here. without defining any networking. And that's where Azure will create the Vnet and the subnet for you. A little dangerous there. I think you should define those. So the subnet, we're going to come over here, and we don't have one, so I'm going to say create a new one. Oh, create new. Somehow we got a public IP address. I'm going to say, okay. Is there a create new here? New. Oh, because we got to create a new virtual network before I create a new subnet. So create new virtual network because we need one. We don't want to use that name because we don't want to use that address space. So we're going to delete the address space they're suggesting. You're welcome to use that address space if they're suggesting that one. I'm going to call this one Azure Vnet. How about there? For address range, like I said, I'm going to do 192.168.0.0. And do I put the 24 in here? Yes, it looks like it. And I want 16. All right, for my subnet, I'm going to call it AZ Guy Subnet. And that's going to be 192.168. Whoops. 192.168.1.0. That's looking pretty... Oh, forgot the prefix there, 24. It's looking pretty good now. So I'm going to say OK. Okay, so it looks like subnet. It took it for us. Public IP address. We want one of those. We'll just let it create one for us. Network security group, basic, okay. That's basically gonna allow RDP to come through. And management, we'll take a look at that. Probably here we're gonna turn some things off. Let's see what our options are. Boot diagnostics, no thanks. Identity, we'll talk system of managed identities. Pretty cool thing, but we're not going to talk about it. Auto shutdown. If you want your VM to shut down at 7 every day, it's not a bad idea, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to enable disaster recovery. Guest OS updates enable hot patch. Let's see what it says about that. Hot patch allows you to take critical security updates for reverse patches without restarting. That's pretty cool. I wonder if that costs money. Probably does. We'll learn more about that later. And then I'm going to have them update the VMs automatically. Let's look at advanced. Extensions we'll talk about someday soon. Hosts, groups, nope. Here's our PPG, our proximity group. Then we got generation 2 VMs, but we're going to limit to a generation 1. Tags are a nice way to organize your work, but we're not going to do anything with tags for now. Looks like we're going to choose review and create. And our validation pass, which is excellent. Little review, our resource group, our virtual machine, our region, no availability options, image, Windows 10, our size, our username. Looking pretty good. Where it's going to put it. And it's going to create we could have created the virtual network and subnet beforehand as Azure resources, but this is going to create them for us. So we're going to say create. And I'm going to say this is going to take 4 to 6 minutes. Now you might think, well, that's a little long time, but pretty quick. In the old days of racking, you'd still be trying to find still unboxing the hardware. So doing pretty good. I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to pause it right at 10:37. We'll call it 10 minutes. See how long it takes. All right, just a small update. It's been about 1 minute. And you can see I have 2 of the 5 resources being created. So be back in a minute, give you an update. Okay, another minute's gone by and nothing new has been created yet. We've got status of OK. Let's hit refresh. You would think it would auto refresh, but let's see. No, refresh didn't really update any status. Still got 3 dots going, so we'll check back. Alright, another minute's gone by, so I think a total of 3 minutes now. And I'm still waiting for no status changes. I'm going to hit refresh. I don't think refresh really works here. So we'll just wait another minute to see what happens. Okay, it didn't really update in real time, but it did finish. So I'd say about 4 to 5 minutes. I notice you get your choices of go to the resource, create another VM, but let's go to our resource. And there it is. It's running. It's in our resource group. There's our name, Windows Desktop 10. Here's the public IP address. Go ahead for now and copy that to the clipboard. And notice it's in our virtual network here, which we define. Here's our private IP address. And let's click on where it says resource group. Click on the resource group name. And that'll take us to our resource group. And you can see here's the resources it created for us. Not just a virtual machine, but it created our public IP address, a network security group, a network card, a disk, and the virtual network. So to final up the video, let's go ahead and try to RDP to our virtual machine. So remote, desktop connection. Control V, there's my public IP address. I give it a name of speed. It's blinking down here. We'll just say yes. Looks like we're going to be successful. So, want to say thanks for watching. And in our next video, we're going to create a VM again, but this time using PowerShell. I think it's important, especially if you're going for the exam, you have to learn PowerShell. I don't care about this, I don't think. So I'll just say, anybody get out of it? No, I guess not. I'll say accept. And there we go. We got our Windows 10 machine. And try to keep this one around if you can, because we're going to use this as an admin machine. So we're going to install some stuff on here and administer our Azure from this machine. So, all right. Well, thanks for watching, and congratulations on creating your first VM.